grounding of the 737 MAX program. All 73 MAXes were grounded last year after two separate crashes that killed 346 people. The report details how Boeing intentionally downplayed issues surrounding its flight control system, which the report states led to both crashes. Joining us live now is aviation expert and author of Airline Ratings, Geoff Thomas. Geoff, good to see you. Boeing has acknowledged that it's learnt many hard lessons, in its words, from these incidents. Can the flying public be confident that the issues outlined in this report have now been fixed, that the problems are indeed contained to those grounded 737 MAX planes?
Oh, look, absolutely. And many in the industry would argue that there was nothing actually wrong with the 737 MAX in the first place. And this is more about pilot training standards than anything else. But yes, Boeing did make some mistakes. They made some assumptions about the level of training of the pilots. And so the same assumptions are made by Airbus and others as well. But since then, they have totally redesigned the flight control system of the aeroplane. And they've added in some features that for scenarios that have never been encountered before, cognizant of the problems with flight training in some parts of the world. It's going to be an outstanding aeroplane. But the thing with this report, it labels, it talks about Boeing horrific series of miscalculations, etc. But a large part of this report relies on lay media stories, and many of those stories were completely incorrect. For instance, it says, and it has 26 pages devoted to production pressure, and it suggests that Boeing rushed this design. The reality is the development of the 737 MAX is the slowest development of a derivative of any Boeing aeroplane ever. To put it into context, it took just under 5 years from launch to first flight of the 737 MAX, a derivative of the 737. It took Boeing just under 3 years to design, build the 747, and by the way, build the factory that it was going to be built in, and 3.5 years for the 777. So Boeing has built aeroplanes in very short time before, 3 years. This one took 5.
Geoff, this 250-page report, it was also pretty damning of the regulator in the US, the US Federal Aviation Administration. They came under fire for being way too close to the company, to Boeing. We know 346 people died. The company's facing a huge lawsuit. When you look at that relationship between the regulator, I mean, is that a systemic problem, do you think?
Well, it's a very interesting point, Ash, because it's rather ironic that the Congress criticises this particular relationship because they were the ones who set it up in the first place. They cut the funding to the FAA. I mean, the FAA has to go to Congress cap in hand all the time. They're always cutting back. And they put in place this particular regime that sits there today, this particular certification process, and which is more Boeing doing some of the certification of its own aircraft. And yes, one would definitely argue that's not right, but it's the Congress who put it in place. But at the same time, in this last 20 years, for instance, Boeing has built and certified the Boeing 777-300ER, the 200LR, the Boeing 787-8, 9, 10, and the 747-8. In the last 20 years, under the same scenario, the same FAA oversight, self-certification regime, and not one of those aeroplanes has had a fatality. So, it's on one hand to criticise the MAX certification, but at the same time, the system's been in place for well over 20 years, and it was put in place by Congress itself.
Yeah, we know that Boeing is trying to recertify those 737 MAX planes, so it'll be interesting to see how long that takes. Geoff, just a bit closer to home, we've seen a lot of debate this week about lifting caps on overseas arrivals. Are there enough commercial planes, clear this up for us, are there enough commercial planes ready and willing to bring Australians home? That's what the Prime Minister has said. Or is there a need for government planes to step in to make that happen?
There's well and truly enough aeroplanes coming in and out of the country every day. For instance, coming into my part of the world, Perth, we have Qatar coming in every day. What they do is they take chilled pork back to the Middle East. We have Singapore Airlines 3 or 4 times a week coming in. What do? They're taking, Singapore Airlines chilled pork to Singapore. It's chilled lamb to the Middle East, I should say. And those planes are largely empty, so there's plenty of seats. It's all about the cap, and they can turn that. The airlines can sell as many seats as you like. There's plenty there, and they can clear that backlog very, very quickly if the caps could be lifted.
Looking at Qantas, it's announced this week it might be moving its headquarters. There's a number of states now lobbying to be the new home of the airline. What's behind the move? What do you expect the result will be?
It's a very interesting move on behalf of Qantas. I mean, sadly we know that lots of people have lost their jobs, so therefore there's a large amount of office space at Mascot. There's a large amount of office space for Jetstar down in Collingwood. Logically, you'd say the two would amalgamate, Jetstar move up to Sydney. However, of course, Qantas is saying, well, you know, the Queensland government forked out $200 million to keep Virgin Australia in Brisbane, and it started a bit of a bidding war a few months back between different states. So why don't we do the same? And it may well be that Qantas goes back to the future, goes back to Queensland, because Brisbane Airport, for instance, now has 2 parallel runways, and it doesn't have a curfew. So Brisbane now is a far more attractive gateway than is Sydney, which is capacity constrained before COVID-19. So Qantas would look at any very interesting scenario that the Queensland government might put up, and it may well be they move north. But still, of course, have that presence in Sydney, have the terminals in Sydney and all those sorts of things, but their headquarters and more of their operation could move north to Brisbane.
Geoff, when you look at those job losses, we know that hundreds of them will stem from this decision to try and outsource some of the ground staff jobs. Is that something that Qantas has actually been wanting to do for a long time, or is it purely a reaction to the COVID crisis?
Look, they have been. There's no doubt they've been wanting to outsource it for a long time. The TWU, the baggage handlers, the ground handlers, has been a very expensive part. They've had trouble with the TWU, and it's a very costly part of their operation. And their competitors are getting the same services from other people like Menzies and Aerostar and others at a much, much cheaper rate. So it's all about getting the industrial relations landscape of this and the efficiencies in. And the other thing too is Qantas has said we will accept offers from the existing staff. They put together a company and submit a bid. They're not saying you're losing your job. They're saying, well, you submit a bid and compete with these others who are more efficient than you are, and we'll look at it. But look, it's just part of a whole series of efficiencies that both Qantas and Virgin Australia are going through at the moment to see where they can save money.
Geoff, I see Qantas is launching today what it's calling a mystery tour. It's a 7-hour flight. It takes you over Australian landmarks like Uluru and the Great Barrier Reef as a way that people can still fly without worrying about the border restrictions that are in place. Are people really missing flying that much that they're willing to just fly around and not land anywhere for 7 hours?
Oh, look, absolutely. I'm surprised it's taken them this long to do it. If I was in Sydney, I'd jump on and now go for a fly too. But yes, the right sort of aeroplane. No, the right sort of aeroplane, 787. I think they're going to use a 787. I could be wrong there, but great platform, big windows, and people do enjoy flying, and they do enjoy the sightseeing. So to see Uluru, the Great Barrier Reef, some great Australian tourist icons, why not? And be pampered for 7 or 8 hours and take a break from the reality that we now know. I'd be part of that.
Interesting to see how popular it is. Geoffrey Thomas, always appreciate your time. Thanks for joining us.
Pleasure, Ash.